Well, it's my pleasure today to welcome Dr. Josh Brake in a conversation with us here at LeTourneau University. These conversations I have found to be very stimulating for me personally and always wonderful to get to have a conversation with people that are doing some amazing things out in the world. But today, the special opportunity we have is to have a nice chat with one of our graduates. Dr. Brake graduated from LeTourneau University in 2013 with a bachelor's degree in engineering. He also got a master's from LeTourneau, but also has a master's and Ph.D. from Caltech in electrical engineering. And he currently is a faculty member at Harvey Mudd College. He's an engineering faculty there and has a special gift for engaging with ideas of technology and education and human flourishing. And I have really enjoyed really staying current, Josh, on a number of things by keeping up with the things that you're writing. So I have found it tremendously helpful in getting a good, solid perspective on this crazy world of advancing technology. So welcome to our conversation today, and thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks a lot, Steve. I really appreciate the chance to get to chat with you, and I've been really looking forward to this for quite a long time. So I'm glad that we're here today and get to chat a little bit about all these different things.
Well, thank you so much. In just reading some of your entries in your weekly Substack newsletter just recently, I thought, oh my word, I'm taking notes on each of these entries, and we could devote a single conversation to any one of those. And so I will have to think about how to extend this conversation to some other point. But it would be helpful just for starters, for our audience, for you, if you wouldn't mind, just review with me a little bit about where you're from, and then how did you end up at LeTourneau years ago?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Connecticut in the Northeast, about an hour outside New York City. And my kind of initial connection with LeTourneau was through my dad. So he went to LeTourneau back in the 80s. And so when I was looking at colleges coming through high school and was starting to think about where do I want to spend these really formational years, was looking at engineering as a major. And so obviously LeTourneau was already on the list because my dad had been there and knew about it. But then really became something for me that as I was visiting places, I still remember having this kind of walk around the loop, not that kind of walk around the loop, but a walk around the loop, when I visited LeTourneau to just try to discern where the Lord was, and just really felt that LeTourneau was where God had me in that next season, a real peace about that. And so that really turned out to be quite true. And I've really, in now almost a decade after graduation, seen the way that God has used those seeds that he planted during my time at LeTourneau in really rich ways that I'm so grateful to be able to steward.
We recently featured you in our Now magazine, which goes out to thousands of people, our own alums, but others as well, friends of the university. And in that article, you gave us a little snapshot of your time at LeTourneau and what that was like for you. I'd love to, if you would share just a bit about how did LeTourneau shape you, and now as a professor even, but maybe even broader, just as a person.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to overstate the influence that my time at LeTourneau had on me, both as a person and even more as a professor. In that piece, I wrote a lot about the impact that Dr. Graff had on me, and I just don't even know how to put that into words. There really is no way to put it into words. I mean, the thing I keep thinking about when, as a professor, every day I'm coming into work is people above all else, right? And that's something that Dr. Graff really put at the heart of who he was in all the different ways. And so that really shaped my way of thinking. And I think even more broadly than that, the thing I learned most at LeTourneau was that education primarily needs to be about relationship. And that's the most impactful things. When you talk to people about what is the most influential piece of your education or upbringing, they very rarely talk about a specific class or a specific thing they learned. And even if they talk about a class, it's not really about the class and the course material in so much as it's about the person who is teaching them. And so I think that that has shaped a lot of how I think about the way that I'm looking to live my career as an educator, as a professor, is to be about people before everything else. And it's not that those other things aren't important, but the big thing is about recognizing that these people that we have in our classes and that we work alongside and that are teaching us, those relationships are really what matter most.
I can only imagine the impact you're having in Harvey Mudd because of that. And I was told many years ago, and I saw you reference this quote. I wish I knew, or maybe you do, the original author or speaker of the quote, but it's something to do with basically people are really rarely going to remember what you have to say or what they even, what notes they took down or what they learned, but they'll most remember how you made them feel. And that is, I've just seen that bear out in, I think about my own mentors and how they inspire me to be a certain kind of person and to make a certain kind of impact on the world. And I just by reading what you write on a weekly, basically a weekly or monthly basis, I can tell that the way that you care for your students, because you care intensely about the content, which is obviously part of a prerequisite of being a great professor. But then you care about the students and communicating that content well, but also thinking about what they're going to be doing out in the world with what they've learned and how they come to know about it. And so I wish I could see you in action. Maybe someday I'll be able to pop in your class if I'm ever in California and can do that, because I'm sure you're making the kind of impact that Dr. Graff has made on generations of people here at LeTourneau. There's so many things that we could dive into, Josh, but I want to read for our audience's sake the little short paragraph that you put in your weekly Substack newsletter in terms of just an introduction into the absent-minded professor newsletter that you send out weekly. And in that, it sort of describes what you're after. And it says this, after a welcome, it says, this newsletter is my weekly outlet for manifestos on technology, education, and human flourishing through the lens of a prototyping mindset, which I want to come back to in a second. I believe that with a little bit of curiosity and the right systems of iterative improvement, we can live more fully and help our neighbors to do the same. And then you invite people, if they get excited about that same thing, to subscribe. And I would encourage everyone to subscribe because it is absolutely worth it. Because one might think, as I may have, was, well, these entries week to week are going to be about the same thing, just maybe more of the same. But I found that you read widely. You often recommend books in your Substack that I'm thinking, man, I can't wait to get that. With ways of summarizing those and encouraging people. You bring in different interlocutors that you refer to, and then of course there's things like Ph.D. pies and pizza recipes and cookies and I think, man, I also want to hang out with Josh. I don't want to just read his stuff. That's what that makes me think about. But I want to come back to something that you mentioned in just that little preface. What do you mean by prototyping mindset?
Yeah, so this really for me started, it's really built on top of some, these things that have been kind of under the surface. And what I found that's so interesting is that most of the stuff that we know and we see in other people, it's actually just a problem of figuring out what's the right language to talk about what they do. And across all these different fields, whether it's a professor or somebody working in industry and tech, or a comedian or a filmmaker or whatever, there's these kind of things that really translate across different areas. And so the idea of prototyping mindset is really inspired by the Stanford Life Design Lab, is actually where I kind of first picked up some of the ideas around this, which is started by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And what the kind of idea that they take there in a very Stanford-esque way is to say, what if we take the engineering design process, which we typically think about as this step of, these 5 steps of designing new technology or engineering solutions, where we first empathize with the user, understand what their problems are, then we define those problems, then we're going to ideate solutions, prototype those, and test them. And what if actually we took that kind of mindset and framework and thought about it outside of the traditional realm of engineering as a field, and actually applied these more broadly to our life? And that really resonated with. Obviously, there's a connection as an engineer. That's something that I see and use all the time in my technical work. But I think it's true of people in a lot of different fields. And so the kind of thing, as I've gotten, looked more and more for this, I see this all over the place. Comedians, right, are always prototyping. Every time they go out, they tell the joke in a slightly different way, and then they're taking notes. They're doing these kind of design processes. Anybody who's telling a story, or, founders of companies, entrepreneurs, are famous for this type of thing. Every time they go, they're like tweaking it a little bit, right? Like, let's test it. Let's try something new. Let's see how this lands. And what I think is really important about that perspective is that it's really focused on the audience and communication. Like, how are we adapting what we're thinking about to resonate with an audience and form a connection about this relationship piece? So the prototyping mindset is really just this way of me trying to think about approaching the problems that we, face in our lives, or the things that we aspire to, in an idea, in a framework that allows us to get traction. And so the idea is just to start with a small prototype and then iterate, build on that, really embrace failure as a prerequisite for succeeding eventually. And the kind of analogy or the mental image that I keep in my mind is of these, you've probably been to these parking garages with the spiral ramps, right? And if you look at that from top down, it looks like you're going in circles, right? But then if you look at it from a 3-dimensional perspective, you see that going in circles is actually going up. You're iterating and improving. And so I think that's when I think about the design cycle, it's not just this 2-dimensional thing going on. It's a 3-dimensional process that if you do it right, you can, keep moving towards your goal with that.
I love the way that you draw, in many ways, what you just described on the process, whether it be struggling and learning, and how that feeds into things. And I'll maybe ask you a little more about that in a second, but you bring all these things to bear, in particular on education. Obviously, you're called to be an educator, and in your area of expertise, of course, is engineering, electrical engineering, optics, and things that I won't even begin to try to delve into very deeply. But you write a lot about how engineering education is producing a sort of technical skill, but also producing something else. You've talked about learning how to learn, about producing curiosity and wisdom. And you've thought some about, and you just mentioned this, the relational nature of education, in places like Harvey Mudd and LeTourneau. And what I guess another way I would say it is that you bring to bear the relational nature of technology, or what technology is trying to do at its best. Will you say a little bit more about how to balance technical skill with some of those, let's call them higher order aims, even in the classroom?
Yeah. I think a perfect place to start on this is what I tell the engineering sophomores in our experimental engineering course that I teach along with 4 of my other colleagues. So it's this cool team talk class where they do these experiments with these underwater robots. And it's pretty amazing to see the way that this course really shapes them. And what I tell them is that you come into this class as a student studying engineering, but we want you to leave this class thinking of yourself as a budding engineer. And so from that perspective, there's really like 2 buckets that I think about when it comes to that. One is like the technical skills piece. You got to know how to do the thing, right? You got to know how to design an experiment, how to design the instrumentation, how to capture the data, analyze it, understand what's going on. But then there's this other piece of it that I think we often lose sight of in the technical sciences, right? When we're thinking about the hard sciences, is that who you are and what you bring to the table as a person doing this thing really matters. So the other big piece of like a learning outcome that we explicitly talk about in that class is this class is about identity formation. This is about helping you to become an engineer, right? In whatever way that looks like for you. And so there's all these other aspects that play into that, which is related to what you're talking about, which is who are you as a person? What are your core values? What's your mission and vision? What does the good life look like to you? What do you care about in the world? What are the things that you want to have an influence on? And then how do you work? How do you work on a team? How do you embrace failure? Like all of these pieces that are really the nutrients that surround the technical work that we're doing and that our students will be doing in the future, and thinking about how do we actually think of ourselves less as like an assembly line, like a Henry Ford style, churning out new graduates, right? Like stamping them with some kind of stamp, to say actually what's happening is much more like gardening. We're cultivating, pruning, creating the right soil, the blend for that plant to really flourish and grow, and to know that every student that comes out of our programs is not some widget in a kind of engineering sense, but is a person and unique in the way that they approach the world. And that actually is a huge strength that we want to try to draw out and really embrace in our students.
I love that. That is so well put. And I think about it, it sort of fills out it's sort of embodying a call rather than just trying to get something done. And it's so holistic. It's who we are. And one thing I've learned at being at LeTourneau now, this is the close of my 18th year, is that there is a culture where a students say, I am an engineer, not just I'm studying engineering. And I've always thought that'd be a little bit odd, but maybe that's a really good thing, because it's actually hitting at what you're saying, which is we're moving into and trying to help our students think about what they do as part of who they are and not separate from that. In the same way, in my field, biblical studies, some might consider us, let's say, a professional theologian, but everyone's a theologian. Everyone has some perspective on God or a higher power and what he's doing in the world, what problems our faith might be trying to solve, what's the end or goal of humanity or all of creation. We all bring that to bear, and it's probably better for us all to think about ourselves in one form or another as a theologian. And but I love the way that you're bringing, especially with engineering. One reason why it resonates with me is such a technical area. It's analytical, and it's mathematics and physics and so many other elements, but there is something that animates it all. And there's something important to us as people, as human beings made in the image of God, that it's more than just I do engineering. And that it's so obvious in all the ways that you write and what you write about, that being relational, the relational nature of education, but also just of practicing your giftedness, is crucial for what's now become, I guess, sort of a buzzword, but human flourishing. And so I really appreciate that. I know you've.
Yeah,
go ahead.
The other thing I'll say on that too is just I kind of see this as just another instance of this one pot system idea that Dr. Graff was so adamant about, right? Which is to say, we always as humans are looking for like, okay, let's compartmentalize this thing. And what I do as an engineer over here is separate from what I do as a human, or what I do as a Christian on Sunday, or what have you. And I just think that, like, fundamentally, that's such a limited way to see the world. And I think it also is at the root of a lot of the things that we're starting to see when it comes to, let's say, AI or technology at large in our culture, is we have this way of thinking that, well, we're just developing technology. Like, this doesn't have things to do with the broader picture of what the good life looks like and what we think that is. when actually it's very, very deeply grounded in a vision of what we think human flourishing looks like, and what the vision is we have of the world. And so to try to reintegrate those things is a constant battle and struggle, because it's just natural for us as humans to try to like disentangle and separate things. But it's really important for us to, if we're going to design technology that's actually going to help humans, to be always thinking about how that connects, not only with our own personal, identity and who we are, who we bring to the table, but how it affects our neighbors too.
Mm. You mentioned AI, which of course is so profound and pervasive in our world as a whole. I'm really curious to get some of your latest thoughts, because it's developing and growing and advancing in all sorts of ways. I know you've been thinking about AI and large language models and their uses and their impact on our society, and obviously higher education in general is trying to get its arms around AI. I mean, every conference I go to, it's how are we going to harness, if you will, AI um, for the sake of education. What do you think the near future holds for us in this way? And do you see AI being an important element of higher education?
It's so interesting to me that some of the best stuff I've read about AI was written 40 years ago. So
Wow.
this is I think one of the, there's a number of different things I think that are going on here, but one of them is the fact that we think that this is new. In some ways it is. There are aspects of this that are new, but one of the best things I've read in this vein is this series of lectures by a Canadian physicist, Ursula Franklin, who gave these 1989 CBC lectures called The Real World of Technology. And there's a couple of things that are really great about these lectures. One is that they were delivered orally, which means they're very bite-sized. And so they're really good actually for engaging in the core content of the ideas, even as you may feel frustrated that there's not maybe the depth that you would want to see fleshed out in a full book. But I think that's actually an advantage, broadly speaking, rather than a disadvantage. And I think what she highlights is a couple different things that are really important and that really resonated with me as I was reading her. One of them is that technology is never created in a vacuum. And whenever you create something, it's this kind of, it's in the ecosystem. There's always this ecosystem. So you introduce AI into a classroom, and it doesn't just change the classroom in some very predictable way. Like there's all of these intersecting pieces that it gets put into this feedback loop of how the culture is set in the ecosystem. And it's very hard to predict all of the different potential avenues for the way that that actually will work itself out. The other thing that I thought was really prescient when she's talking about the impact of technology more broadly is that we often think about technology in the situation where a single user uses it or a small group of users use it, and we don't think about it more broadly when it reaches mass adoption. And so it's one thing to think about how the car impacts your ability to go somewhere. It's a whole nother can of worms to think about how everyone having a car and roads all over the place impact and shape our society. And so part of the challenge, I think, with technologists at large is that we're not very good and we're not very intentional about thinking down the line and trying to trace out, A, to see where in history we've seen these types of things happen and trying to draw the parallels. And then B, trying to say, well, let's imagine this technology plays out like this. How does this influence us when it's not just the teacher using AI or a single student using AI to help them with something, but how is this impacting the culture of the classroom when all the students are using AI? What's the impact now where we introduce a chat bot, let's say like a Khan Academy, Khanmigo, or something in that same vein for a single student or a group of our students? But what does that actually do to the relational fabric of the classroom and of an educational institution? And I'm certainly not a Luddite. Luddites certainly get a bad name. I think they get a bad rap. We can go into that in another, that's for another day. But I think that I'm not anti-technology. Obviously, I'm an engineer and I love technology. But at the same time, we often really don't think about the way that technology impacts us beyond just the positive aspects. You know, even as we think about medical interventions, right? If you watch an ad in the Super Bowl for the latest drug, it's like all these side effects that get listed, right? That the regulatory agencies essentially make them put in there to say, well, you could have insomnia or, you know, maybe die, right? Like, okay, well, like, let's think about that. But we don't do that when we think about, here's the new app. Like, hey, you could use Instagram. It's going to connect you to all your friends and you're going to see all these pictures of what's going on. Oh, by the way, you're going to become addicted to dopamine hits and like just need to scroll and feel this loneliness and all these other deep things. We don't have really good, healthy ways of talking about that. And I think that's another thing that as an engineer, I feel like is very important to build into the way that we think about technology as we're building the technical aspects of it. All these other aspects need to be built alongside that, not just as some kind of like after effect, like, do no harm with this thing after you make it. It's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, what a balance to strike. 'Cause you talk about sort of the delightful uses of technology, and there is something, maybe even godly, so to speak, of pressing into the potential of humanity and creation and where the two meet, and yet there's threats, if you will, and I think I emailed you, or many months ago, maybe a year ago even, when we started seeing real fears of what technology can do unmitigated. The AI apocalypse. The apocalyptic language is really fascinating, actually.
Yep.
And I've done a little thinking and reading on that, and it's pretty pervasive. Some of the same people that are developing the technology and are pushing the limits are also the ones saying, wow, we need to have some real guidelines on emerging technology. And of course, the question is always, even if I'm sort of behind that in principle, is, well, who says what is good and right and beautiful, and what?
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
that easier said than done on some of that. But one of the things, just fundamentally, is the ability that the threat, if you will, that technology might control us or dictate us, um, rather than humanity or the technologies controlling it. Um, yeah, I think I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that as a threat, perhaps, and how do we know? How do we know if actually technology is inadvertently even doing more of the dictating than the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, part of the challenge with this whole thing is that it kind of plays on, I think, our natural human impulse to see the positives and downplay the negatives, right? And we do that both in the marketing of these technologies, the design of these technologies, and the use of these technologies. It's very easy for us to think about all of the great things that our phones and computers and all the things around us enable for us. But there's some real downsides too that I think part of the problem is we don't really see or think about those things unless we can somehow disconnect ourselves and separate ourselves from the technology in a way. Because part of the deception of the technology is to say that you need it, right? Like it becomes such a part of our natural rhythm of life that we just can't even imagine what it is to live without it. What would it be like to live without our phones, or to go on a walk without our phones? Heaven forbid, right? Like somebody needs us. Well, like it's these lies that we tell ourselves. And it's the companies and the developers are not off the hook for this. Like they're certainly about engaging you and trying to grab your attention. And there's so much of this that's tied up into the economic and political and historical aspects of how these technologies were designed and developed, and the fact that all these social media companies know that the way that they make money is by keeping you engaged, right? But the ultimate irony is that the question is not whether you're engaged, it's what are you engaged in? And is that thing actually useful? Is that valuable to you? Does that actually help to cultivate the things that you want to be as a person? And I think if we take some time to separate and and really answer that question for ourselves, we'll find out that the answer is no, not really. We're actually in service to someone else's agenda, and these things are not really aligned with what we want, or what we need, what our vision of the good life is. And so we've got to find a way to think through that. And I think that in terms of threaten and control and finding in many ways, what I feel like is the middle path between optimism and pessimism around technology is to say, really try to get at the heart of what's the thesis statement of these technologies? Like, what's the purpose? What is the vision of life that this technology says is good? And these are things we don't often talk about as engineers. And we just, think, well, here's a problem, let's solve it. We make this thing easier or more efficient or faster, or we can make more in less time. And that essentially is what we view as the ultimate good. But efficiency and productivity are not human values, right? Like fundamental human values. Whether you do something faster is not actually important. It's about, is it valuable to do in the first place? And then maybe there's a value in doing it faster or more efficiently. But those are not the things that are going to lead to lasting flourishing and joy for us as humans. And so we've been deceived in many ways, and we've deceived ourselves, unfortunately, in many of these ways that we think about technology. And so I think we need to find some better ways to think about it, both as designers and as users.
I love in much of your writing and sharing, in a way, you're talking about sort of, I would call them ironies. So irony of inefficiency versus efficiency, or some technology, while trying to personalize, is actually impersonalizing in different ways. And it's a little bit like, as I've read a lot of Andy Crouch's, I know you have, and in his book Strong and Weak, when in one of his chapters, when he talks about the lack of vulnerability, let's say in playing a video game where there's easy results and success without actually anything being at stake. There's really, and so there's some ironies there. There's that sometimes we miss if things just go left unexamined, as you're saying. You've one sort of topic that stuck out to me in a number of places in your writing is the idea of struggle, which so much of our life, it seems, in our modern world, is trying, for one, just to eliminate struggle. And there's something, I guess, natural about that. We don't like to be sidetracked or delayed or set back. And you talk about the difference between pain and struggle, which I thought was so well put. I'd actually never thought of that, but there is quite a distinction there to be made. But with you talk about using writing, for example, and with our Chat GPT and so forth, maybe as a context, but a writing as, it's working through ideas, and AI is one way to avoid the struggle. And another just way to think about it is the difference between back in not too long ago, if you didn't know what a word meant, you had to go to the dictionary and actually look it up, and now we all like to be able to Google something and just get the definition, but maybe there's something lost there. And I wonder if you ever think about the same process as an educator in terms of struggle, and what role does struggling play in learning?
Yeah, I think it's so important, and it's so interesting to think about pain versus struggle, because I think there's a lot of, we kind of have to disentangle some of these different things, because struggle has this very negative connotation for us. I think we think that struggle is bad, almost in the same way that we think of friction being almost always bad in like an engineering situation, right? Like friction or resistive losses, like we just lose energy to heat, or it's just reducing the amount of energy that we can deliver to the output, right? It's just viewed as waste. And I think that in some cases that's certainly true. Friction is not getting us anything productive. But, as a lot of the analogies that I think about are connecting this to physical training, right? Like if you're going to go into the weight room and try to get stronger, you have to struggle. Like the whole thing is like, if you go in there and just don't push yourself at all, you're not going to grow. Like the way our bodies work physically is to experience a stress and then recover from that stress. And in recovering from that stress, we become stronger. And obviously we have to be careful about how closely we tie the analogy to mental training, for instance, right? But I think there's something really true there about learning too, that if we just see the same information or we just encounter the same concepts over and over again, like we're not pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone. And so if we don't do that, we're not going to learn, we're not going to grow. And so I think there's a couple different, again, it's like intertwined with all these different things. But I think one piece that for me is really at the heart of it is this fear of failure. This is a big thing that I think, especially for students and engineers, or really, but for anybody, is we're really scared of failing. And we really have this unhealthy, whether it's struggle or failure, we have these unhealthy ways of thinking about them. And I had this realization the other week that probably if you looked at the people who are the most successful, one of the number one things that you could correlate with their success is the number of times they failed, right? Yeah. And obviously there's stupid ways to fail. You can do something that never had a chance of doing anything positive at the beginning. But if you think about it as an engineer, and this gets back to the whole prototyping mindset thing, the idea of a prototype is and I got this from another writer, Scott Whithoff from Stanford, who talks about prototyping as embodied questions. And this idea that like when you prototype something, you are trying to answer a question and you're embodying that in some form or fashion. And so when you view it in that perspective, the goal of every prototype is to fail. But in the failing, you learn something and then you iterate from that and you improve on that. And I think that really connects to this idea of friction and learning and education. What I try to tell my students and remind myself too is that in the ways that we're learning, we have to be embracing failure. It's not even enough just to say, we'll tolerate it. But actually, failure is a very positive thing if we do it in the right way and if we're learning something from it, because it means that we're actually pushing ourselves beyond our limits of where we kind of see the extents of our knowledge and understanding and our skill. And so I think of myself as an educator more and more like a coach in a lot of scenarios where my goal is to help you to understand how to unlock your potential and encourage you to push beyond that. And just in the same way that if you're lifting some heavy weights in the gym, you're going to want a spotter there to be able to help you if you are not able to make the lift and not have the bar on your chest, right? If you're trying to bench press too much, you have a spotter there, you have a coach, you have somebody who's walking alongside you in community, in relationship, to actually encourage you to push yourself and then to be there to help you when inevitably you're going to fail. And if you're not pushing yourself to failure in the gym, you're not going to grow to your fullest potential. And so there's this real tension there. But I think that that's like a lesson I want students to understand, and for all of us to understand really, is that failure is not the enemy here. Failing poorly is the enemy, and that friction is not always the enemy either. Like there's some part of friction that actually is quite a lot as we're learning. And the struggle, we have to embrace that.
Phil Burks, who's become a really good friend of mine. He's a trustee and a graduate of LeTourneau, and he's a really successful entrepreneur, humble, but has written a book called How to Eat a Failure Sandwich. And it's to that very point. It's just the struggles along the way that has helped him become who he is, and then do some really amazing things, over his career. And so, we know our current generation sometimes gets maybe a bad rap of a lack of resilience. Sometimes that's a word, that grit, that we aren't seeing, and probably goes for almost anyone now, no matter their age or generation. And I've wondered if how does technology impede our ability, the quick fix, the quick entertainment or distraction or escape? How has that impacted our ability to struggle well, which I think is your point. And
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, on on that
yeah,
point, Andy Crouch too. Like we said before, you mentioned that Andy has been loom large in your imagination on these issues and has in mind too. And his latest book came out kind of before all this generative AI stuff really hit the fan. But he was so prescient in the way that he talked about what is the life we're looking for, right? Like, what are the things that we actually care about? And this idea of technology promising superpowers really resonates with me, right? And part of, as I've continued to think about this, and I just read this great piece by this MIT economist, David Autor, recently. And one of the things that he sets forward, which has been part of his train of thought, I think, for a little while now, even though I haven't been familiar with his work until recently, is the idea of technology in an augment versus automate frame, right? Like, is technology extending the abilities we already bring to the table as humans, or is it somehow replacing us? And I think that this is what is really at the heart of this idea of struggle is, of course, we don't want to struggle. Like, struggle oftentimes is connected with pain, and it's almost always discomfort. It's not comfortable. It's uncomfortable to struggle, whether we're climbing a mountain or working out in the gym or running. Like, whenever we push ourselves a little bit beyond our limits or push ourselves to the limit, we feel that discomfort. And the allure of technology is to say, don't worry, you don't have to struggle anymore. There will be abundance. You can just not have to do all these hard things or learn how to program or learn how to write. Like, you just push the button and we'll help you, right?
how do you synthesize? How do you help them understand the tension between the positive value of technology, but also with the dangers that come with applying technology in certain ways? And are there any ways that there are tips or pieces of wisdom that you give them as they want to go out and make a difference in the right ways?
I think the first thing is just to say you've really got to bring a curious, questioning lens to all of these problems. Don't just take what the companies are feeding you and then take that as the gospel truth, right? About what these things are doing. Oftentimes there's really complicated motives and incentive structures there that they're not incentivized to really give you the full picture. And my hope is that as we continue to have these conversations and these questions get more embedded into our context, that we start to think differently, because I don't think that these are actually necessarily at odds with one another. I think it's just about the way that we're going about it, and oftentimes the way that we're trying to move fast in a particular way to, let's say, capitalize on a certain market share, right? We want to, it's very conquistador-esque type of language, right? Like, it's very much go and capture the thing, and very military language. And I think that the language is really important about how we talk about these things. And so I think a lot about what are we cultivating as opposed to what are the things that we're doing, right? We have this very mechanistic way. We use a lot of these words that really are associated with machines to talk about what we're doing as humans. And they're really two different things. So I think the first thing is to pay attention to the language and what are the stories that are being told. Like, what's the narrative that Apple tells you about the new Apple Vision Pro? I got to try it for the first time this last weekend. It's an amazing piece of technology. I mean, in terms of the fidelity of this thing, I mean, it is just unbelievable how crisp and clear it is. And so there's part of me that, as an optical engineer especially, is like, wow, that is amazing what we can do now. Everybody complains about it being a little too heavy or whatever else, but get over that. I mean, it's impressive to see what they're able to do. But then, of course, there's that side of it, which is we'll give you superpowers. But then what does this do to us as humans? What does this say about what our vision of the good world, good life is? That we literally are going to pay $3,500 to put blinders over our eyes and see our entire world mediated through cameras and overlaid with apps and screens and whatever else. It's a whole different vision of what reality is. And the language here is really important as we even talk about augmented reality or mixed reality or Apple Vision Pro. There's a lot of freight being carried there that, if we're just not paying attention, it's very easy to just drink the Kool-Aid without even realize you're drinking the Kool-Aid. And again, this is not to say that I'm anti-technology, but again, Andy Crouch is going to come up again and again and again here, and everybody should read Andy Crouch. He's just such an insightful thinker on these ideas. But he talks about this idea of, just like what is the life you're looking for, and instruments versus devices. Are we using our technology in a way for a very specific purpose, in the way that we would use a scientific instrument or a musical instrument, a way that actually extends our humanity in very deep ways? Or are we outsourcing our abilities and our lives to devices to allow them to control and influence and put us in a certain direction?
Yeah, you note his language, the innovation bargain. Of course, there's trade-offs to advancing technology, and I think if nothing else, just are we willing both to recognize we more quickly recognize the benefits, but the trade-offs, what is being sealed off or what is not possible, because something is now possible. And I've always appreciated that about him in a number of his books, the different ways he talks about that. At LeTourneau, we talk a lot about the question, and I know we're not unique in this way, probably, but the question being, just because you can build it, should you? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Maybe in Paul's language, not everything that is permissible is beneficial. But I'm curious if there's something, and maybe you just alluded to it, but is there something else or that's going on right now? You might be forward thinking and seeing things that are down the pike, perhaps, that might raise this question for you personally, that is this really a good thing? Just because we can, should we do this? Is there anything that you might offer?
Yeah. So the one that has been stuck in my head, and I haven't found a way to kind of work this line in yet, but is the idea of the silicon calf, right? And I think that this is the idolatrous vision of artificial general intelligence. So like the idea about artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is really the end goal of a lot of these AI startups right now, which the idea is not to use artificial intelligence as a tool or an instrument, but to essentially create a machine that has what they would try to say is human level intelligence, whatever exactly that means, right? And whether or not you think this is possible or not is one question, but I think it really is a great question for us to be asking. Okay, let's say, just for argument's sake, that we can build this thing. Should we build this? And I think fundamentally, I can't help but see the parallels between the golden calf, right, and the story of Exodus, which is to say, everybody come and bring all of your riches, and let's build this thing and make it our God, and essentially worship it in a way that, say, we're putting the created in the place of the creator. And there's so many different connecting pieces there. And I think one of the things that has been most exciting to me in the conversations I've had over the last year or so about AI is it brings so many of these questions about what it means to be human and what we're all trying to do here to begin with to the forefront in ways that other technologies don't do as clearly. Like, it's not as clear as, with your phone to say, like, well, what does this actually mean for me as a human? How is it shaping me? But when we talk about artificial general intelligence, it's right there in the open. Like, we are literally trying to create a machine that is, in some sense, indistinguishable from a human, even beyond what like a Turing test sort of analysis would try to create.
Can you speak to the role of the liberal arts and humanities and helping us imagine or examine what the boundaries might be, or how we go about weighing, is this the right thing? Is this a good thing? We don't, sometimes at STEM institutions, the liberal arts can get short shrift, but seems super important. What might you have to offer and say about that?
Yeah. I think I have this, phrase in my mind too, right? With history may not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. Like this kind of idea,
Hmm.
right? Where we kind of think the natural way of thinking as an engineer is like, I have AI now and deep learning and all these things that are in some sense fundamentally new. And on the one hand, there is some truth to that. Like it is real innovation. There are new things here that have not yet been discovered in the history of humanity. And yet, on the other side of that, to say, well, actually, the way that we use these things, though, in our culture may not be identical to the way that we use automobiles or as people talk about these industrial revolutions, right? Steam and then electricity and then the internet age. And now people are talking about the AI, the age of AI. And to say, if you think that the nature of a technological revolution is totally independent from a technical revolution of the past, you're really not you're not taking advantage of the lessons that history has to teach us. And so part of this is like a modern arrogance to say that, well, it's different now. And I think I just want to push back on that and say, okay, yeah, I agree. I'll give you the point that there are different things now about the way that this is working, but there's a heck of a lot that we can actually learn from history and the way that these things played out, even in the simple way that I talked about that Ursula Franklin, example before, to say, think about how technology is used as an individual. And then let's think about how this shapes the ecosystem when everybody is using it. And it doesn't often take very much technology to really make a significant impact. You think about, I don't remember where I read this, but in a recent book or somewhere, but the impact of the spur or the stirrup, right? The stirrup was, in terms of a piece of
Mm.
technology, it seems almost trivial to think about stirrups. Like, who cares about a stirrup? What does that do? But if you think about then the downstream, what that simple technology enables in terms of warfare and the rest of it, it's pretty profound.
Unfortunately, we're almost out of time here, and I could go on and on. There's so much that I'd love to chat about with you, Josh. But just to close out our time today, I'm curious what final thoughts of wisdom or encouragement that you might have for us at LeTourneau as we seek to fulfill our calling as the Christian Polytechnic University, maybe for faculty and staff, or how about prospective students and families, or a faculty member that's engaging with us and things. Maybe maybe that's a place I'd want to spend my life. What might you say to us here at LeTourneau in terms of wisdom and encouragement in fulfilling our calling?
Yeah, y'all are going to think I'm a broken record by the end of this, but the basic line here is that for me, the future of education is personal, not personalized. And what I mean by that is to say that personalization has this mirage of relationship that's associated with it. Your news feed is personalized. Your Twitter feed is personalized. What you see on the internet is personalized for you. And it is designed to give you the impression of relationship when actually there is no relationship there. And so I think as we have artificial intelligence or other technologies, whatever is next, even after AI, we really need to pay attention to what that says about what we believe life is about. And for me, really the heart of it is that relationships are what are most influential and meaningful to us as humans. And so when you are thinking about, as an educator, the way that you are teaching students, the way that you're learning from your mentors, and as a student, the same thing, how you're interacting with your peers, how you're interacting with your professors, how you're interacting with the staff, right, that are coming alongside you and helping to support the mission of a university or a learning experience. We really have to think about the value of the relationships. And that's what we have to cultivate. And what ultimately is going to be the thing that lasts in our lives and what really shapes us and makes a difference.
well put and inspiring and insightful, Josh. Thank you so much. We're so excited. We're just delighted to be in relationship with you, and uh, so proud of what you're doing and admire the way that you are impacting not only your students, surely, but also all the people that are reading the things that you're sharing and the reading things that you're reading, and the way that you are really encouraging us to think fully about technology and the great goods and services that technology can provide, and the ways that they do extend the human endeavor in all the ways that God would see fit, and yet to be cautious about what guardrails need to be there and what needs to be taken into account as we attempt to live our lives to the glory of God. And thank you for doing this today, for this conversation, being on the podcast. And we just wish you well and can't wait to see you soon. And we know that God is with you and equipping you in every way. And so we'll continue to pray for you and with you for the impact that you're making on students and young people's lives. So thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Steve. So grateful for LeTourneau and the influence that it's had on me. So really great to get to chat today.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. Well, thank you again. This was so fun. I really, truly wanted to dive into almost you, and you wrote a new, you had a new entry today, and I was like, darn, just when I thought I was caught up, and I don't know how you do it, Josh. Seriously, these aren't just a few paragraphs, but not only are they. I think that the right size, because they're not so long that you can't get around to it, at least as a reader or as someone is following. But great insights, and it feels like you're introducing another book or another author almost every newsletter, and truly, it's been so helpful.
Man, it's been funny to see. It's kind of taken on a life of its own. It kind of started in beginning of 2022 with just, hey, let me just build in public here. It's inspired by this guy Austin Kleon, who is in Austin, writer, thinker. He wrote this book. Actually, I have it on my desk here. It's behind my machine here. Show Your Work, which is just such a good book. And so he talks in here about his 10 different. He does like these lists. He's all about the lists, but his whole thing, like, you don't have to be a genius. Think process, not product. Share something small every day, right? He's a prototyper. Yeah. He's a prototyping mindset, even though he doesn't use that language. Yeah. And so that was kind of like, hey, I'm just gonna start sharing a couple little things every week. Fast forward 2 years, and now I don't know how many hours I spend every week putting into these things, and I don't have any content plan. Like literally. Yeah. I sent that out this morning. I have no idea.
You don't have a plan. It's not like, okay, here's my 6-month sermon series or something, yeah.
No way. Not even close. So it's very much like what's burning in me today, this week, and I'm trying to crank something out. So it's a lot of Monday nights, staying up late, trying to get it ready to go.
Yeah. It sounds like, though, it's tiring, it's also energizing for you. And
hugely.
I'm sure it is. And remind me of your family, how many kids you have and all that.
Yeah. So my wife, Abby, and I, we have 3 kids now. So Judah is 4, Chloe is 2, and Lucy is 4 months now, just a couple weeks ago. So
wow.
Keeping us busy. That's for sure.
Great. That's awesome. Well, thanks for giving us a good hour or so. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure once we get this sort of produced in some form or fashion, happy to send it to you. And, but this is it really encourages our people here, our audience, not only just inherently because, wow, look, one of our graduates is out there being a leading thinker on some of these things, but, just to remind our people, our trustees, what are we doing this for, and what's all this about? And so you've really contributed here to our mission in a fresh way. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'm looking forward. I've been enjoying having conversations with Ben recently too about the Faith Science and Technology Initiative. So that's going to be pretty fun too. I'm looking forward to I know Jonathan has me penciled in for a talk in the fall to come back to campus. So looking forward to that once he gets back from sabbatical. And I shared with Ben, I've been having some conversations recently with Praxis Labs, which is where where Andy is at. And So we'll see what happens there. But I'm kind of looking for the make everything count twice, angle to see
Yeah.
what might come from that. So
Yeah, I'm very impressed with what they do at Praxis. And yeah, I think, I look forward to seeing as these conversations develop. Of course, having on campus is going to be amazing. And Jonathan, as you know, as you said, is in Oxford, but that means a lot to have folks contribute here and to say, hey, LeTourneau, or we're in these conversations, and that's
that's
great.
right.
So yeah, I'm sure we'll just stay in touch on those things. And you're just so kind to offer your time and attention. So thank you.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, well, listen, if you ever want to follow up, have another conversation, I'm always game.
Well,
So
thanks.
that would be super fun.
I'm sure we will down the line. So I appreciate it. So have a great afternoon, and I know we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Great. Thanks a lot, Steve. Appreciate it.
You too.